Hello, and welcome back to BT Live. I am your host, Zoe Alexandra, and once again, honored to be joined by my co-host, Rania Khalek.
Hello, Zoe. Big,
Rania, were you watching the Knicks game last night?
I was, and I gotta say, I got bored because I was like, well, this is boring. They're losing really bad, and it's like it was just kind of sad to watch.
It was
Because
a little sad at
well, the
moments.
Spurs, it was very sad. It was so incredibly disappointing. It's like they just were not playing well almost the entire game, and the Spurs were just so graceful and like making every shot, and like the Knicks couldn't even get their defense together. And then I was watching it at a place, and I was like, okay, I can't. This is actually really upsetting. It was like the fourth quarter had started. They were like 30 points down almost. And I was like, all right, this is sad. I'm just going to go. I have to go to sleep. So I actually left. Yes, I left. And then like 5 minutes after I left, I start getting messages that now they're in the lead by one. And I was like, what? Or maybe like 10 minutes later. But it just shows you how quickly things can change. And then it was amazing. It was like amazing because then I'm just getting the play-by-play in my family group chat. And they ended up basically winning. It was the largest comeback in NBA Finals history, apparently. 29-point comeback in like the last 4.5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Amazing.
It was incredible. And, to segue into what we're really here to talk about, which is the news. Well, not that that's not news, but perhaps political news. I think this in a way, the Knicks comeback, how quickly things can change, is a good reminder of what this year has been, which has been rapid changes. Unfortunately, not for a Knicks victory, but for much more nefarious ends. But before we get into one of the rapidly changing stories, I want to get some reminders and announcements out of the way. If you are watching this show right now and you're thinking, how do I support the show? How do I support Breakthrough News? How do I give even more money so that they can have a sports spin-off show, which I know everyone would be very excited to see? You can go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe and become a member for as little as $5. If you are already a patron, you can continue. You don't have to move right now. We would love to have you as a just normal member on Breakthrough News. But if you're a patron, you can stay there. You will get all of the access that members will get, which is once we put this show behind a paywall, you will get to see the full show live. You will get to participate in special member Q&A. You will be sent incredible newsletters from our team of writers, their reflections on current political developments and other perks. So please go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe to become a member today. And if you're watching the show right now and you think, oh, well, I will also become a member, but I want to do something within this live stream, well, you can smash that like button. You can comment, you can share the live stream, and also you can donate in the chat. We love live donations because then we get to call out your name and say, wow, thank you so much, Scooter Kid 24, or all the other types of YouTube names that people have. So please take a minute, like the show, share it, go to breakthroughnews.org/subscribe, so we can, again, get that sports show that you so desperately want. But no, in all seriousness, we do have an incredible show for you today. There's a lot happening today. Yesterday, we saw an escalation in the situation in Iran, U.S. launching attacks. We were going to get into all of that in a moment. Today also marks the beginning of the World Cup, which is taking place in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. A lot of politics surrounding that. And we are going to hear from an activist in Albania, where I know a lot of people have seen these videos of massive demonstrations across Albania, probably wondering, What is Albania? Does this have any geopolitical importance? We're going to be breaking all of that down with an activist who has been on the streets for the past several weeks. And finally, we are marking officially the debut launch of the China Report in Breakthrough Live. So we're returning to the China Report in a new format. So that is very exciting as well. So please stay tuned for the show. It's going to be great. And with that, let's get into it. So, Rania, you have been dutifully following the kind of hour by hour, minute by minute developments in Iran. We saw massive escalation yesterday, despite signs that perhaps peace talks were going well. So before, just to give us this basic grounding, what is going on? What prompted this latest escalation? Where is the war headed? And is diplomacy still an option?
So as I was watching the Knicks game yesterday, I was between during the timeouts, which there were many, and in between the quarters, I was looking at another game, and that is the game of war that America is trying to play with Iran, because it was really like minute by minute changing last night. Over the last few days, you've had a massive escalation, dramatic, really, really dramatic, with the U.S. basically resuming massive bombings across the country of Iran, including, by the way, drinking water facilities in the south a couple nights ago that left 20,000 Iranians without access to clean water to drink. Just a blatant war crime. Iran, of course, retaliated by completely closing the Strait of Hormuz yesterday because there was another series of bombings, which Trump this morning bragged that he dropped $250 million worth of bombs on Iran last night. Imagine that, $250 million of bombs dropped on Iran last night, and then bragging about it while he's also bragging that inflation is up, and that's a great thing. And inflation is up because of his policies. And one of the many policies being the fact that he started this disastrous war that has led to the closing, of the Strait of Hormuz, which has led to an increase in oil prices, and also fertilizer and all kinds of other things that go through the strait. That's a very, very important trading point in the world that now Iran has had to retaliate against the U.S. and close. So the Iranians closed the strait completely again, and also have been striking Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, which host U.S. military assets and have helped the U.S. in the war on Iran, which is why that's who they retaliate against. And then this morning, we woke up to a Truth Social post of Trump threatening to hit Iran again and hit Iran hard. It's worth reading his post because it's so criminal and insane. He said, the United States will be hitting Iran, whose Navy, Air Force, radar, anti-aircraft, and all other forms of defense, together with most of its offensive capabilities, are gone! Exclamation point. Very hard tonight. Also, all in all caps. We'll be hitting Iran very hard tonight. At some point in the not too distant future, we will be taking Karg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela, which is working out brilliantly for both Venezuela and the United States of America. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So it's kind of amazing. That's Trump basically announcing that the U.S. will be bombing Iran very hard tonight, and that the mission is actually the theft of their oil. And I guess that's how you can really understand the year 2026. It's one where, the monsters of the universe declare war crimes openly. And they know they can because the world is too backwards and cowardly to stop them. But more importantly, this was initially prompted, the U.S. will tell you, by Iran downing a U.S. Apache helicopter a few days ago in the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iranians said that was an accident, and that also, why was a U.S. Apache helicopter patrolling the Strait of Hormuz to begin with? And also, just like another side point to let you know how insane the U.S. is being right now, they also, I still can't believe this, the U.S. apparently struck an Indian ship off the coast of Oman, killing 3 Indian sailors, and this is believed to be the result of U.S. operations to blockade Iranian ports. So if I was India, I'd be pretty pissed right now that the U.S. just struck one of my vessels and killed a bunch of my citizens who are sailing that vessel. But just to go back, I mean, this is a massive escalation. There has been some tit for tat throughout this period of supposed ceasefire between the Americans and Iranians. But at this point, I'm not sure you can continue to call this any sort of ceasefire, because it's kind of back to 2 months ago, where you had the U.S. bombing Iran directly, and Iran retaliating against U.S. assets in the region. So we're kind of back at square one. And I'll just stop there if you want, let you tell me where to take it next.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's very important for people to kind of understand what the lead up has been and what has happened in the last 24 hours, because it, on one hand, it's a lot of the same things and a lot of the same threats. But as you say, rightfully so, it's also a major escalation. And, you point out that India should be quite mad. Yesterday, I saw Narendra Modi post something just really praising Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So it seems like he's still kind of transfixed, enchanted by the U.S.-Israel duo for some reason, despite the fact that it is literally completely against his interest. So, Rania, you, again, talk about how a lot of these things have been kind of repeating themselves. And it does seem like Trump is trying the same things over and over again. Okay, we're going to strike hard. We're going to take out Kharg Island. We're going to go after the infrastructure, which are threats that he's made before. So would you say, is Trump stuck? What is the end game? And does he even have one?
No, I don't think Trump has an end game. And yes, he's absolutely frustrated and stuck. And we're even hearing it from media reports that this is basically the administration, Trump specifically, not really knowing what to do next. He's pissed off because Iran is not capitulating, and he can't understand why. Like, in his mind, he's just like, we keep bombing them and they're not capitulating. They're still making the same demands. They won't give up nuclear enrichment. They won't stop demanding we let go of their frozen assets that the Americans have seized and basically stolen. And they're still demanding a ceasefire in Lebanon. And, he's trying to get a better deal than Obama got. And doing all of this has done nothing but ruin America's standing in the region, destroyed American assets across the region. And the U.S., the longer this goes on, the more the global economy gets screwed and collapses, and the more it's going to blow back on Donald Trump politically, because he doesn't have a victory here. It's actually a loss. It's an American loss. He could not get these people to submit, which is why he keeps changing the goalposts of what he even wants here. Overthrow the regime, okay, but you killed their entire leadership. There's still a Khamenei in power, the son of Khamenei, and on top of that, it's still a functioning country. The longer the strait is, like the Strait of Hormuz, like they didn't even understand that it would be shut down, and it was shut down, and then the goal became to reopen it. They haven't been able to do that. And also, let's not forget about the interceptors. All of these interceptors that have been used to try to shoot down these really cheap Iranian drones and Iranian ballistic missiles, which they're firing again, by the way. These interceptors are running really, really low now, to like critical levels. So that's why time is on Iran's side as well, because if the U.S. resumes this war, really, and we see what we saw last night every single day, if there's like 100 interceptors left in Kuwait, then your base, after 100 more Iranian drones needing to be shot down, your base is open. It's naked. It's open for Iranian fire. The same goes in Bahrain. The same goes in Jordan. The same goes in Saudi Arabia. The same goes in the Emirates. The same goes for the Israelis, which were also running low on interceptors. So again, time is on Iran's side. Trump is running out of options, but his only options are, the longer he waits this out, the only options are to either just call it a quits, accept that you basically lost, and compromise with Iran. That's the most reasonable option if you're not a psychopath, and if you're a little bit smart. The other option is to dig in deeper, screw over a lot more people in the world, and come out a bigger loser later. Because if he goes through with what he said today, when he talks about seizing Kharg Island, which is where Iran's oil, most of its oil is extracted and kept, right? It's where its oil industry is. that would require a ground invasion. So you're telling me you're going to send U.S. ground troops to Iran when this war is already so unpopular? If you have American body bags coming home, you'll actually have street protests against this war, which you haven't really had so far because everyone's against it. But like, other than gas prices going up a bit, you haven't had dramatic impacts of this war felt in the U.S. because so far it's an air war. But the second you turn it into a U.S. ground invasion, that's a totally different story. And as for the Iranians options are also to either keep defending themselves if they are forced to, and wait it out, or to win now. And I mean, winning is like, it's a subjective word in what you think winning means. But if it means the U.S. losing, then it's basically a win for Iran. That's how I see it. Because the thing about Iran is the U.S. is strangling their economy, but their economy has survived sanctions for several decades. They know how to survive economic strangulation. And they also have other countries helping them with bringing things into the country. And they also still are able to get some ships out in the Strait of Hormuz to export their oil. And they exported a ton of oil before the U.S. began their blockade. And then the whole idea of using the Iranian population to rise up against the U.S., that's in the toilet now. That's in the trash. The U.S. tried. It didn't work. And now the Iranian population hates the U.S. more than it ever has because the U.S. has been bombing their school children and destroying their infrastructure. So,
well, yeah. I mean, there's
Trump is stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
No, he is. And, it's interesting that you say that they're, even threatening a ground invasion because at the same time we saw just 2 days ago, Pete Hegseth was in the U.S. Military base on Guantanamo Bay, which is in Cuba, already making threats against Cuba. So the Trump administration, I do not think, has the capacity to wage this many wars on this many fronts, and we'll see where they kind of put their resources. I wanted to mention one thing before asking you one final question, Rania, which is that, great guests that we've had on a lot, Trita Parsi, who you've interviewed several times. Today, news has broken that he's being investigated. He is a Iranian and Swedish citizen, I believe, and now there's kind of questions into whether his green card status will be revoked. And he has been, a pretty loud voice in criticizing this war, but really explaining what's behind it. You've had many conversations around this. What do you make of this, that, even like a mainstream anti-war voice is facing this kind of, in lack of a better word, political persecution?
This is completely desperate and cruel. Trita is not some marginal figure. He is pretty mainstream, actually. And it's because, his analysis is on point. Like, we've had him on a bunch of times. He's very good. He understands the situations. He has sources both on the Iranian and the American side. So that's why his analysis is impeccable, because he's talking to people constantly. And he's constantly giving interviews. He's done interviews here on Breakthrough News. He's done interviews on CNN. He runs the Quincy Institute, which really balances out this kind of right-left, anti-war sentiment that we see taking place across the spectrum. So I think it's really desperate to kind of knock out somebody who's been really effective. I hope, if they really were to deport Trita, they're going to send him to Sweden. He's still going to give interviews from there. I'm not sure what they think that's going to do. I guess they're trying to intimidate him so they'll shut up. It shows how effective he's been, just calling out how ridiculous and illogical and outrageous and criminal this war is. But on top of that, I think it's sort of, demonstrates that this administration is stupid, because Trita is somebody who people across the board are going to come out and defend. People on the left and right are going to be like, this is really outrageous. What has this guy done? It also just speaks to the authoritarian, anti-democratic nature of this administration, that they have continued to go after people who, having a green card is supposed to basically be like being an American citizen, but trying to strip people of their rights based on their political beliefs. And that's exactly what's happening here. This is a part of what we've seen them doing first over Palestine, and I guess now on Iran. And I guess I would also say this probably was lobbied for by the Iranian monarchists, who have been pushing for this war, who Trita has spoken out against. And that is a nasty crew of people that will pull all levers they can to destroy your life. Solidarity with Trita.
Definitely. It's definitely heinous, and it's interesting because this war is already so unpopular. and the outcry that took place last year when Mahmoud was detained, when Rumesa was detained, when Mohsen Mandawi was detained was so strong. I don't think they really are making the calculation of what impact carrying this forward would actually have. But with that, Rania, I'm sure we're going to be back to this story. We'll do an emergency episode if it's necessary, because I think we do have all eyes on Iran right now, and on what unfolds in the coming hours, and especially with the threat of intensified strikes tonight. But
I think also real quick, before we move on to our next guest, I do just want to say that the Iranian foreign minister came out and basically said the ceasefire is basically over. And one of the ways that we've been able to kind of understand that there's still some kind of ceasefire in place is after each tit for tat, you'll hear the Americans say these are self-defense strikes. This doesn't mean the ceasefire is over. And you'll also hear the Iranians kind of say, this doesn't mean the ceasefire is over. This is the first time I think I've heard them actually address the fact that this is basically annulling the ceasefire. So I think this is a bit of a more serious escalation in that sense. But we'll
see. No, it's definitely important to note that. Well, again, we will be back to this story. You can keep following Breakthrough News on our social media and on our website for more frequent updates on this. And
also, you guys, make sure you smash the like button if you haven't yet, if you're just tuning in.
Yes, I see a disparity in terms of likes and viewers. So let's get that more even. Send it to your friends. It is time. Well, in going back to sports, because we heard people are into sports these days. And this summer is big for sports, not only in New York City, where the Knicks are about to win the finals, but today is the kickoff of the FIFA World Cup, the 23rd FIFA World Cup. The World Cup, once celebrated as a display of international love of football, or as we call it in the United States, soccer, and a celebration of cultures and diversity and, internationalism in a way, now has been mired in controversies. We did see it with the World Cup in Qatar, but now this year, as it is being jointly hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, we have seen scandal after scandal. And just days before this first match, which will be between Mexico and South Africa, headlines internationally have been dominated by news about extended searches of refs, of players, of the team's personnel at the airports, interrogations, visas being revoked of people trying to go to the game. I saw news today that fans in Argentina were given free TVs if they were denied a visa to go to the United States and watch the matches. And also infrastructure not being up to par in the United States to receive an event of this magnitude. So lots of intersections of politics and sports in this World Cup. And to break down what is at stake this year and how the geopolitical situation is playing out on the field, we are very excited to be joined by BT's own Nicholas Mwangi, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Nicholas, how are you?
Hi, Zoe. Hi, Ryan. I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Well, today is the start of a very interesting World Cup. There's a lot of reasons why this tournament is historic and in many ways bizarre, but I think let's start out with basics. Nicholas, you're a big football fan. You follow the sport closely. What are you excited about with this World Cup, and what is historic about this year for teams from the African continent?
Wow. Now, I'm looking forward to it as a football fan and somebody who also played soccer for a while. And so the World Cup is always an exciting time, an exciting tournament. But every tournament, even regional tournaments, we just had the African Cup of Nations this year, and it was lovely. So we're always looking forward to regional and global tournaments. Today, South Africa, Mexico. We hope South Africa wins. We hope all African teams go to the farthest. We have only reached semi-final once, and that is Morocco in Qatar, and they finished fourth. The closest again was Ghana in 2010, Cameroon in 1990. So we need to go far. I think another exciting thing is that there are more teams from Africa for this tournament, around 10, which is an increase from previous numbers of participation from the continent. But yes, it's turning out to be a World Cup of chaos, confusion, and disappointment. But we'll see how it goes. But definitely not a tournament like any other, compared even to Qatar World Cup, a country that has been accused of a lot of human rights issues. But even Russia, the tournament at the par, the inclusion was at another level. So yes, but generally we are hoping that the continent goes far in the tournament.
Yeah, well, one of the challenges early on was the participation of Iran in the World Cup while the U.S., which is the host country, is waging a war on it. I mean, at one point, I really was wondering to myself, is it even safe for the Iranian team to try to come here? The U.S. might actually try to assassinate them. And a couple months back, a U.S. official floated the idea of kicking out Iran and replacing it with Italy, which is so insane. But of course, this proposal was rejected. But now Iran's home base has been moved to Mexico, and the Iranian team has to basically fly in and out of the U.S. on game days, which already puts them at a disadvantage because that's a lot to do. Can you talk about the geopolitical backdrop of this year's World Cup? What does it mean for the world's biggest bully, the U.S., whether it's the war in Iran or slapping the entire global South with sanctions and then deporting immigrants? What does it mean for this country to be hosting this international tournament?
I think the United States misses the point of the entire tournament, historically of how it has been hosted as a very international tournament, accommodating, even going beyond political divide for many years. And so we see that they're punishing Iran and perhaps sending a message even to the larger global South on how they're treating other people outside. Because not just Iran, South Africa are playing today, but South Africa had some delays to enter the United States. Senegal, for instance, had extra searches, Iraqi for the same. But what is even worse for Iran is that there are tickets, federation tickets to the country that are usually allocated to every federation for the team participating in World Cup to at least 8% of the stadium capacity has been revoked. And that is outrageous. I've never seen something like that, never heard of that. And so not only were Iranian staff visas revoked, but even Iran fans will not be coming to the United States to celebrate their team. Which is outrageous, and even the comments from the U.S. officials that Iran should be replaced with Italy. He is from Italy and the United States, I think, dual citizenship, and it's funny, and because the way Iran came to the World Cup is through merit. Their stages to World Cup. Every team that participated had to qualify. And so how can a team qualify by merit, by hard work and persistence to this tournament, but then they don't qualify for entry to a country? And I think that's outrageous, and I think the context of the U.S. aggression war to Iran, and the war is not turning to their benefit, and how they would have loved for it, the outcomes. And I think this is just one way that they're using to punish the Iran in the context of this war. It's unfortunate, never had, never seen, and I think it just leaves a bitter taste for the tournament, a tournament that should have been defined by happiness with a lot of celebration. But that targeting of Iran and even Iraq and other teams is not only send a bad message, but it's a bad taste heading to the tournament.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've never seen any such measures taken against Israel, despite the fact that they have been, present in international tournaments, whether it's a song like Eurovision or any of the sports tournaments, which of course has gained, a lot of different boycott campaigns because of Israel's presence in all international spaces, representing in both the European leagues and et cetera. But I want to turn to another issue which has garnered a lot of attention and kind of indignation, which was the interrogation and the deportation of Somali referee Omar Artan. Artan would have been Somalia's first World Cup referee and is highly respected on the African continent. And of course, he's not the only person who faced scrutiny at the border. You mentioned examples of the Iranian officials, the Iraqi player. I want to show a video of Artan returning home to Somalia after his deportation. So, first it's interesting. I'm not sure any referee in World Cup history has ever received such a rousing kind of applause and cheering. This is the complete opposite of how he was received in the United States. But can you talk about how people on the continent responded to the deportation of Artan, and what does it say about how Africa is impacted by Trump's xenophobic policies?
Yeah, indeed. Another unfortunate incident that has made a lot of people in the continent angry and disappointed. Because Omar is not only the 2025 CAF referee, is a distinguished referee. He has earned it, is very qualified, and that's why he was selected. And so even how he was received, the solidarity, is because people can tell clearly this is quite a discrimination against him. But not only symbolically, it sends a message within the continent. This is racism. This is discrimination. Why him? They have tried to give all manners of excuse. They took long to give a response why they rejected him in the first place, because he had a diplomatic visa. He was only denied entry. Then yesterday and today they start saying that he had ties with members of terror groups, which many people don't believe in that. Going by the video and the reception that he has received in Somalia and in the larger continent, the solidarity, you can tell how people feel. But also, Somali, has been designated has been banned by the United States in terms of visa among the countries that were banned in Africa. So several countries that experiences this due to the immigration policies Trump has brought, but also they also try to tie him to a tweet that he made several years back, I think criticizing Trump on his first term. And even so, that's freedom of speech. That can be a ground for disqualifying people because of their political beliefs for a tweet or something they say. But all this process has left people angry and disappointment. He will have been the first Somali referee at the World Cup, but also one of the few African referees in the World Cup. There are not many African referees in the World Cup officiating. And so this is it's a huge disappointment, but also the message it sends, people are very bitter about it, because the World Cup should have gone beyond these political differences and variations. And so people will be looking forward to the tournament, but with a bitter taste even after what has happened to Omar.
Yeah, it's so outrageous. And then it also brings us back to the fact that, earlier this year, we had an uprising in Minnesota against the deployment of the Customs and Border Enforcement and ICE by the Donald Trump administration, which was fueled by this racism aimed at Somali Americans that Trump was pushing, as well as all of his supporters, and ended up, with the shooting and killing of several protesters in Minneapolis, both of them white, by the way, over this. So, I mean, again, fueled by racism at Somali Americans, and now we're seeing it play out here. Also, I just want to mention that the Iraqi team has also been impacted by this extreme racism being enacted against people visiting the country from places that Trump and his MAGA supporters don't like. There was an Iraqi striker from the Iraqi team who was questioned for 7 hours at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And their team photographer, after being questioned for more than 10 hours, was denied entry. And this, by the way, is the first time that Iraq has been in the World Cup since 1986. And this is a country that, of course, the U.S. has spent the better part of the last 40 years destroying. So yeah, to then treat their players this way just adds more insult to injury and just, goes into the category of all of this just racism and hatred being pushed through the deportation and immigration mechanism of the U.S. And it's crazy to do this during the World Cup. But, moving on from there, I wanted to ask you, for people like yourself who follow international football, or what we call soccer here in America, you're aware that FIFA as an organization is one that for decades has been steeped in corruption and scandal and has really transformed this sport of the working class across the globe, especially in the global South, into one that's dominated by money and profit. Can you talk about FIFA's role in the transformation of football and how the World Cup maybe has lost its way as a result?
Yeah, indeed. FIFA is supposed to be that global organization for football, and it has a major role in making sure there's a proper development for football globally, and even the tournaments that it hosts. It has a role. It has a mandate to ensure that they are very inclusive. But FIFA also has been rocked by scandals after scandals over years. Last year, the current FIFA boss Infantino was asked in regards to the fears that the revocation of visas and discrimination could be to this World Cup. And he said it will not happen. People just needed to relax. It will be very inclusive. That has not happened. He did a media interview today, and he keeps putting this word, just relax and chill. He was asked about Omar's situation, then said that it was out of their mandate, then said relax and chill. I don't know what it means, but also former boss for FIFA, Sepp Blatter, was also rocked with a lot of corruption scandals. Actually, the major scandal was the Qatar hosting the tournament, and the questions were raised how they got those hosting rights, and then there was the issue. There were lots of bribes happening, and so when Infantino came to be the boss of FIFA, a lot was expected in terms of reforms internally, but he has not moved FIFA away from a trajectory of answering just to commercial interests and not protecting the game. Historically, this is a game of the ordinary people, the working class everywhere that have really promoted soccer. Soccer or football. So one of the major things that the FIFA should have done that is not happening, the prices are too high. And so that's not inclusive for the ordinary person who supports football for every day. Even beyond the World Cup, these players that are playing in the World Cup, they play for for clubs. These clubs are sustained by the communities around them. The Manchester, the Arsenals, all these teams are supported by the fan base financially, and for them to be put out to access this tournament because of the ticket prices is outrageous. And again, the question of why it's not inclusive, FIFA has really failed on that front. But it's a very structural thing within FIFA that has become a very corrupt government body in sports, and that is not answering to the ordinary needs of people, and has become very commercial, very business oriented. I had one commentator the other just this week saying, unfortunately, football has become a business, and we have to accept it. We might not like it, but we have to accept it. And I think that's not the way. We don't have to accept it. FIFA has a mandate to protect this game. And one wonders if FIFA indeed can dictate stadiums, standards, sponsorships, and everything. Why is it difficult to voice your own mandate and role for the inclusion of other teams and the fans to the football? I feel FIFA has not protected Iran enough, has not protected Qatar enough, has had little say to what has transpired to African teams and the overly search of players, the dehumanizing nature that has taken place. And I think it's a big problem now for FIFA even going forward. I think this tournament will be very substandard compared to others, and it will leave major questions on how FIFA proceed from here. But yeah, that has been a story for FIFA for a long time. We have hoped, many people had hoped that narrative and could change, but it's not changing under the current boss, and so it will be a very commercial inspired kind of event, and they've made it clear that that's their interest.
Well, it's a very, very important story. And Nicholas, you will be covering the FIFA World Cup from this perspective, because this is the perspective that we need to understand all the machinations and the inner workings of FIFA and these teams, and why, these decisions get made. How is it that the U.S. is hosting and having all of these racist immigration policies? So if you're watching right now and you liked what Nicholas had to say, you should become a member, because he is going to be writing some of these reflections in an exclusive newsletter, which you can get when you become a member at breakthroughnews.org/subscribe. We will definitely be giving you more of this perspective. And, Nicholas, thank you so much for all of that information. And I will be joining you in rooting for the teams from the African continent. You got to do it. Let's go Senegal. Let's go South Africa, Algeria. Yeah. Saw the Algeria team touchdown in Kansas. People very excited about that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Nicholas, so much for joining us. And we will definitely be coming back to you soon for more on this.
So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Well, we got a lot of sports to watch, in addition to continuing to watch every minute of the war that's happening in Iran and the Trump administration's continued threats against Cuba. It's hard. We only have 24 hours in the day, but there's a lot going on.
Also, the death toll in Lebanon has now surpassed 3,700. Big, grim milestone today. And they also hit a hospital next to Sur, which is a coastal city in the south that they're just destroying, because there's a red line on Beirut right now and the Israelis can't help themselves. This is like an ancient city, by the way. Like, I feel like people, when they think of all of these places, they're just like, oh, like there's just like mud huts or something that the Israelis are bombing. Mm-hmm. These are beautiful, ancient places. Like, if any of you have ever been to Rome or Athens and seen like how historic those places are, Lebanon, Sur was a part of the Roman Empire and has all those kinds of Roman ruins there as well. Ancient quarters, old city, like It's just like old mosques and churches, and also beautiful new infrastructure. It's one of the most beautiful beaches I've ever been to in my whole life. I can't go there right now because the Israelis are bombing it. But like, this is like, I just don't understand why it doesn't matter that this is happening. But people are fleeing for their lives several times over, being displaced, just like in Gaza, including Christians. For some reason, we get like more agitated when it's happening to Christians, because Israel's always claiming to protect Judeo-Christian culture. There are also Christians fleeing from their lives. The Israelis have been threatening the Christian quarters in Sur, in Tyre, as you'll see it reported on in English in the U.S., saying that Hezbollah is using their neighborhoods. They're not using there's no one's firing at you from Sur. Not that it makes it okay to destroy the border villages in the south, but like, this is not even a front line. It's really outrageous. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
It's horrific. And I mean, it's there's many UNESCO World Heritage sites there. I mean, that's one level, but it just
Also, Israel loves to be the gay party scene. Like Lebanon is a party scene. Like, it's like, in being a party scene doesn't even save you. Like, Lebanon is known for being a party country. There's like so many beautiful restaurants. Like, CBS did this interview with a guy who opened a burger joint in northern Israel, like, as though he's so brave.
So brave.
And, oh my God.
Brave.
Like, Israel's literally bombing our restaurants. Like, beautiful restaurants that people go to in like nestled into the mountains or on the beautiful coast, and Israel's just destroying them. So like, if you like raves, Lebanon, big rave culture, can't have raves in the south anymore. Will that make you care? People who go to like Coachella and Burning Man?
No, it's the concept that our friend Vijay Prashad always brings up, the international division of humanity, and just somehow, what happens in Lebanon falls under the category of people will not respond. I mean, really, the only country that has responded forcefully is Iran, by keeping Lebanon in as a demand in its peace talks with the United States. And so that, I know it's something we didn't get to today, but I think next week we really have to take up this question again, is how all of this will impact Lebanon and how that will carry forward. So with that, we do have an unfortunate update, which is that our guest who was going to talk about Albania was unable to join us. We're very excited to have her on soon when she's able to, again, to break down everything that's happening with the mass protest movement in Albania against the construction of a massive coastal development project led by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his wife, Ivanka Trump. But we will be back next week with analysis on what's happening in Albania, so stay tuned for that. But now I think we can head to the Breakthrough Live debut of the revamped China Report with Amanda Yee. She will be joining the show with the China Report every other week on Thursdays, so look forward to that. And with that, we can take it away to the China Report.
Trump is launching attack after attack on left-wing Latin American governments and leaders trying to cut their commercial and economic ties to China. What does China's revolution and development model actually mean for Latin American sovereignty and progressive movements? We'll discuss this and more on this week's China Report. Welcome to the China Report. Every week, we'll be helping you sort through all the propaganda with an independent view of the country that we're taught to hate, but know so little about. I'm your host, Amanda Yee. These are this week's headlines. At a two-day summit in Pyongyang, Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un celebrated what they called their unbreakable bond, explicitly pledging to revive the historical spirit of, quote, resisting U.S. aggression. Marking Xi's first visit to North Korea in 7 years, the meeting served as a demonstration of solidarity amid mounting geopolitical tensions. The two leaders declared a new historical stage of cooperation, vowing to reopen borders fully, resume international flights, and rapidly expand ties across politics, technology, and trade. Kim strongly reiterated his support for Beijing's One China principle regarding Taiwan, while the two leaders collectively emphasized safeguarding their shared security interests on the global stage. The visit takes place weeks before the 65th anniversary of the China-DPRK Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. The U.S. just announced a bombshell slapping Alibaba, BYD, and Baidu and over a dozen other Chinese companies onto its military blacklist, turning China's most beloved commercial giants into national security targets. The Pentagon expanded its Chinese military companies list on Monday, adding the e-commerce titan, EV leader, and search engine behemoth. This winding blacklist has become a tool in restricting Beijing's access to U.S. capital, technology, and government contracts. Beijing's embassy called the move discriminatory and an overreach of national security, while Alibaba and Baidu fiercely denied any military ties, vowing to sue. The designation, which bars companies from U.S. defense contracts under new rules taking effect this month, arrives just weeks after Trump and Xi met in Beijing to de-escalate trade tensions. For the first time in their lives, 6 children with spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, stood up from a chair thanks to a video game and a robot that fights back. SMA is a genetic disorder that progressively destroys the nerves connecting the brain to muscles, making movement, eating, and even breathing difficult or even fatal. But in a new study conducted by researchers from Beihang University, Peking University, Third Hospital, and MIT, 6 children aged 6 to 10 wore a lightweight 2-pound robot strapped to their knees. Unlike typical assistive devices, this robot didn't help, it resisted. So each time a child kicked, the robot made this movement harder, forcing their muscles and nerves to work together to rebuild strength. After just a few weeks of playing a video game that turned this resistance into play, the children achieved something remarkable. They could stand from a chair without help. The study also found that these gains remained even after the children stopped using the robot and returned to conventional physiotherapy, suggesting that the training produced lasting improvements in neuromuscular function. China is moving to dramatically expand its maternity insurance system. A draft law just reviewed by the country's top legislature would extend coverage to include childbirth-related medical costs for non-working spouses, while also merging the maternity insurance fund with basic medical insurance fund for employees. The move is part of a broader push to create a more birth-friendly society and ease families' financial burdens. By the end of 2025, maternity insurance already covered nearly 260 million people, with the fund spending about the equivalent of $18.6 billion last year on prenatal exams, inpatient deliveries, and maternity allowances. Traditionally limited to those in employee insurance programs, coverage is now being expanded to flexible workers, migrant workers, and people in new forms of employment. China's basic medical insurance coverage rate has remained stable at 95% for years. From the indictment against Raul Castro and the fuel blockade in Cuba to the kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela to using the pretense of drug cartels to attack Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, Trump has been launching offensive after offensive across the region. And while Washington ramps up threats against Latin America, China offers something different: investment, infrastructure, and an alternative story of development forged through revolution, poverty alleviation, and rural transformation. To discuss the centrality of China and Trump's pivot to Latin America, along with what China represents for the region's sovereignty and progressive movements, we are so happy to have on Stephanie Weatherbee Brito. She's co-coordinator of the International People's Assembly. Stephanie, welcome to the China Report.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. I listed, all the different attacks across Latin America that Trump has been waging. The administration has pretty much been defined by attack after attack across Latin America. I think there was a little bit of hinting of this in the national security strategy that they released late last year. And it seems to me that right now that they've assessed that they can't confront China militarily. And so they're trying to attack it in other ways using Latin America. So I guess, could you talk a little bit about, how central is China to what's been happening to Latin America lately?
I mean, I think that it's obvious that the United States is very concerned about about China's economic development and wants to sort of close the gap that has been created between, on one side, the economic stability that China has and the economic instability that the United States has. So I don't know that their plan in Latin America, I would frame it as necessarily an attack on China. I think that, and the reason I would say that is because the United States has posited or built a permanent attack on progressive, nationalist, sovereignty defending and left governments in Latin America. That's really important, and I think that right now it becomes also part of a strategy to try to basically close economic doors for China, is what I think that the United States is trying to do. And I think that there's an acknowledgement from the US based on kind of the growing importance of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Belt and Road, that they're losing that battle for now in East Asia and Southeast Asia, right? That it's not going to be easy or possible in the short term to limit China's economic influence in the Asian continent, and also that there are many hurdles to do the same thing in Africa. And so what's left is trying to, at the very least, kind of close the doors to China in terms of economic partnerships and influence that it could build in Latin America. And I think that that's not just a geopolitical calculation. I think it's also economic. I think that the United States needs to retain unilateral access to resources in Latin America and is not willing to compete with China for access to those resources or for access to those markets. And so I think that right now, even though there's a longer history to the US control of economic development and economic relations in Latin America, right now China is a big part of that equation too.
Well, speaking of development, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, they have some of the largest economies in Latin America. They currently do a lot of trading with China, and all three of them are having or have had elections this year. And in all of these elections, you have, a left-wing progressive candidate versus a Trump-backed far-right candidate. Brazil's having their election in October. Peru just had their runoff, and right now, it's too close to call. We're still waiting on the final results. And then Colombia is having their runoff on June 21st. So what do you see at stake in these elections in terms of development and sovereignty between the candidates?
I think it's it's the central issue of all these electoral processes on the continent. I think that we have a dispute between progressive, more nationalist forces that want to retain some kind of control of the resources within their borders, but are also trying to build economic policies that redistribute wealth, that try to address the inequality, and in the most aggressive stances that are trying to radically transform the economic base to try to address kind of like an old neo-colonial kind of imperialist system that still predominates. And then on the other hand, we have a right wing, which is regionally connected. There's like a right-wing network that has been built, again, not in recent years, but for many, many years, with a lot of US influence, a lot of US money. And that right-wing network is really advocating for this kind of very submissive relationship to the US, based on an idea that, partnering with the US is the most natural thing for these Latin American countries to do, that the US is some kind of natural ally, and that relationship needs to be preserved at all costs. And then Latin America should not be trying to pursue other economic partnerships with China. again, this is very tense, even for those right-wing candidates, for them to pose that as a proposal. It's a lot of rhetoric, actually, because many of these economies actually cannot break economic relationships with China. Brazil is a great example of that. Brazil is an exporter of raw materials, and despite all the rhetoric that Bolsonaro put forth of this idea that like we need to be fully aligned with the United States, like when he was president, economic ties with China were not broken because there's a huge sector of agribusiness in Brazil that depends on that relationship. And the United States is actually not able to absorb all of that production that Brazil has developed of these raw materials that China has been purchasing for the past so many years. And so definitely the defense of sovereignty is the central question. I think that the United States is clear that they cannot completely expel Chinese, trade and interest from this continent, but I think that they want to control as much as possible and limit it, constrain it, and put it within their own, like have the ability to at least, for example, limit China's access to rare earths in Brazil, or limit China's access to oil from Venezuela. And so sovereignty is a central question. And I think that even though the United States has a history of intervening in elections, there is an escalation, I think, at this time, because the Trump administration is much more deliberate, aggressive, and kind of honest about what it is doing and what it is seeking to do. I think that many of the things that this administration is doing openly used to be done much more covertly in previous administrations. And so there's definitely some meddling in these elections. I think that that's clear. And I think that there's a history of that taking place. But again, this time it is really colored by that kind of economic and geopolitical battle that the United States is waging against China.
Well, another thing that you've talked a lot about recently is this scandal known as Honduras Gate. Just last month, these leaked audio files revealed that the U.S. and Israel were coordinating to return Trump-pardoned drug trafficker Juan Orlando Hernandez back to power in Honduras to attack other left-wing governments in the region, especially Claudia Sheinbaum. So Trump, as he did in Venezuela, he's also using the pretense of alleged drug trafficking to interfere in Mexican affairs, threatening to send ground troops in response to these cartels. So he's been waging like this offensive against Claudia Sheinbaum. And you've argued that all of these attacks on her and Morena come up against the backdrop of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. So can you talk a little bit more about that and how these attacks are being weaponized to sort of attack this progressive government in Mexico?
I mean, first, I think we have to remember that Mexico has a tremendous economic dependency on the United States. Most Mexican production goes to the U.S. market. And so Mexico is in a very vulnerable position in that regard. Like if it were to create some kind of like conflict or allow a conflict to develop with the United States, it would have like very serious repercussions for the Mexican economy. And so Mexico has to like very carefully try to defend its sovereignty in this time, while at the same time not cause a frontal conflict with the United States that also the United States can't afford to get into. I mean, some production from China that when the United States in this process of decoupling has gone to Mexico. And so the United States also has a dependency on Mexico. But at the same time, there is an inequality of power. The United States is much more powerful than Mexico in this relationship. And I think that what the United States is trying to do is to terminally weaken the left in Mexico, which is something that they have done historically. Like, I think that we need to take the example of the PT. The United States actually had a very good, diplomatic and economic relationship with the first PT governments, with the two first Lula governments, with the Dilma government. They had disagreements, but it was a pretty, harmonious relationship. But that didn't stop the United States from trying to build up a right-wing opposition to the PT that would ultimately cause the coup that Brazil experienced in 2016. And so I think that in the same way, the United States is invested in a permanent campaign to weaken Morena because it's very concerned about how Morena could, over time, build the kind of base of popular support, the kind of political power to pursue economic relationships that don't depend solely on the United States. It's not that Morena is proposing that now, but the United States is trying to prevent Morena from ever building the kind of power to do that. Mexico has a very important historical nationalist current in its political landscape. And this nationalist current has never disappeared. As I think many people know, Mexico nationalized its petroleum in the 1940s, and this was a really assertive move to counter U.S. interests inside of Mexico and to try to hold some of its sovereignty. That was stripped away during the neoliberal period under presidents that were pliant to the U.S. But there is a process underway to try to reconquer economic sovereignty or energy sovereignty in Mexico. And I think the United States feels threatened by that and wants to try to weaken the political base of Morena so that Morena doesn't build the power to propose things that could go in that direction. Now, one of the clauses that the United States is demanding in this trade agreement also prohibits Mexico from establishing economic relationships with China. And that's problematic because Mexico is trying to diversify its economic partnerships. And so I think that all of that is part of a longer strategy. Yes, it affects this current trade agreement, but it's again, Morena is a problem, not just in terms of this trade agreement.
Mm. Well, you've talked a lot about, sovereignty and Latin American sovereignty, which is really what's at stake here in this moment. Trump's threats are not just about controlling resources, but also about destroying Latin American integration and unity. So can you talk a little bit about, historically and today, what does China and Chinese development, what does it represent for the people of Latin America and for progressive movements?
So Latin America is a continent that has been underdeveloped by the relationships that it had first with the colonial powers and then with the United States, right? We have not been able to develop the kind of economic autonomy and sovereignty to be able to basically get rid of really problems that have been eliminated in other parts of the world. Like many Latin American countries still have problems related to hunger, to illiteracy, to poor access to health and vaccines. And so it's impossible for the continent to really eliminate that kind of inequality and exclusion if there isn't a overcoming of the model that we have now. And the model that we have now is based on producing raw materials, which is low value added, and depending on selling them to partners in the United States or in Europe, and now increasingly to China. So the Latin American continent needs to industrialize, basically. There needs to be an industrialization process. We need to develop the productive capacity of national industries. And that is not going to happen in a relationship with the United States. That is not advantageous to the United States because it would tip the relationship of power. Latin America would have more power on the bargaining table if it didn't have such a dependent relationship to the United States. Now, currently, China has a relationship with Latin American countries that builds on this previous system because China is also buying primarily raw materials. But what China could potentially offer is opportunities in terms of investment, technology transfer, and stimulus that Latin America requires to industrialize. That is something that is yet to be seen, but it's definitely not going to come from the United States. It could come in relationship to China, but China is not playing that role in Latin America yet. What we can say is that based on the relationships that China has developed with some Southeast Asian countries, with African countries, we see an economic partner where there is more possibility to overcome the kind of economic setup that is still in place right now, which has no future.
Mm. Well, on the question of Chinese development and progressive movements in Latin America, I was wondering if you could, and this may be a little bit of a departure, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the cooperation between Brazil's landless workers movement, MST, and China, because you're in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. And I know MST sees China's rural revitalization strategy and poverty alleviation program as like kind of a source of inspiration, and that there's been some kind of technology transfer between the two. I know China has given MST a lot of farm equipment. So I would be really interested if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I mean, the biggest source of inspiration that China offers to Latin American countries and movements like the MST is the fact that China carried out agrarian reform.
Mm-hmm.
China redistributed land. China defeated the land-owning class. I mean, the Chinese Revolution was waged largely against this land-owning class, which had, for all intents and purposes, enslaved or kept in very, very poor conditions most of the population. And so for the MST and for Latin American countries that are still suffering from a tremendous amount of land concentration, China is an inspiration in that regards. Then on the back of this Chinese Revolution, there's been a lot of different policies for rural development that I think are really important, and poverty alleviation programs that have a lot to teach the rest of the world. At the same time, what I think is really interesting for peasant movements like the MST right now is that China has developed a lot of technological capacity for agricultural production that has potential to deal with a lot of the problems of production that most economies are dealing with. Now, China has a variety of different institutions, universities, and companies that are devoted to this kind of like agricultural innovation. And most of their relationships to Brazil are with Brazilian companies, not with Brazilian peasant organizations. And so the MST says, well, it's not just companies that are producing, that do agricultural production. It's also peasant farming. And peasant farming is much more, positive in its capacity to actually feed the population without destroying the environment. And so what the MST has approached China and these Chinese institutions about is that you should be exchanging technology with us, not just with these massive companies that are actually part of the problem in Brazil. And so what the MST sees is that, well, this country that is still led by a communist party and that created agrarian reform should understand the kind of needs of building peasant power and peasant capacity. And so I think that that's been what the MST has been trying to develop. And I think that it's been a fruitful exchange that has a lot of promise for other countries. I think that it depends both on having peasant movements that have the capacity to learn, to take these techniques, to take this knowledge and apply it. But it also has to do with China's willingness to establish these relationships and to not just limit their relationships to companies, which is, I think, what this kind of exchange is trying to show is the possibility of like people to people development.
All right. Well, Stephanie Weatherbee Brito, thank you so much for joining the China Report. Maybe to end, you could let people know where to find your work if they're interested. Are you working on anything new?
So, as you mentioned in the beginning, I'm part of the coordination of the International People's Assembly, and I wanted to raise here that the International People's Assembly is a global network of people's organizations, and we are organizing a variety of different solidarity campaigns, but one which is really important is the Hands Off Asia campaign, which is a campaign to basically call for the removal of U.S. military bases on the Asian continent. We think that the United States is in this process of trying to encircle China militarily, to try to threaten China, not just through Taiwan, but through other military bases. And we think that this is something that really threatens to, put the world in it, at the cusp of a really serious conflict. And from our perspective, it's not China that's feeding this conflict, it is the United States. And so we're opposed to these military bases and to the kind of rhetoric that the United States is fueling in countries like Japan, South Korea, this kind of animosity towards China that we think is really, really prejudicial to the peace and development of the Asian continent. And so I would really recommend people to go to our website, to the IPA's website, which is IPA-AIP.com, and look into our campaign and find ways to participate in it, because right now there are many imperialist offensives happening around the world that draw our attention and that are essential, such as the genocide in Gaza, the continuous invasion of Lebanon, the attacks on Venezuela and Cuba. But I think that we can't lose sight of what is happening on the Asian continent and the way in which that also is really quite threatening and dangerous.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. China has shattered 3 Guinness World Records at once as 33,000 drones lifted off in perfect unison over Dujiangyan in Sichuan province. In a magnificent display, the drones formed the 28 Eastern constellations, they formed pandas, floating mystical islands, and they also spelled out uplifting slogans across the sky. The show set records for the most drones flying simultaneously under group control, the most drones forming an aerial pattern, and the largest LED mesh flying screen, which came out to be a staggering 148,561 square meter flexible display suspended midair. So that's our show. We'll see you now every other Thursday. Be sure to become a member at breakthroughnews.org, and we'll see you next time.
Well, that was an exciting return to the China Report, and I am very happy that we will have the China Report every other week, hosted by Breakthrough's own Amanda Yee, an incredible program. And next week, we'll see you on Tuesday. By then, most likely, Knicks will be the champions, having beat the Spurs this weekend. We'll see. But we'll be back with more World Cup news, the latest on Iran. Hopefully we'll be able to hear analysis on what's happening in Albania and many other stories. So remember, become a member at breakthroughnews.org/subscribe to support our work here at Breakthrough News, the video, the text, all of the different offerings that we have for you. And we will see you next week.